Welcome back for our final session. I don't know about you, but I feel like the day has been going by very quickly. Session 4, Climate Mitigation Solutions, Decarbonizing Historic Buildings through Electrification, will be moderated by Neil Duffy, who you met earlier, Director of Sustainability and Resiliency for the City of Salem. Neil also, yes, you heard him participate in session 1. The panel presentations will be followed by a panel discussion plus a Q&A with the attendees to wrap up this last session today. Then we really hope that you will stay on to join us for a reception at the Salem Maritime National Historic Site Armory Visitor Center at 4 o'clock. We'll have a reception with refreshments, and we'll hear brief remarks from Jennifer Harden of the National Park Service Salem Maritime Site, talking about the projects that they're launching there. So now I'm going to invite you back up, Neil, to start off this session.
Thanks, Janie. I hope everybody is ready to talk about something other than flooding and water. I think I am. And I hope you're ready to talk about mitigating emissions and electrification and decarbonization, because that's what this panel is all about. We've got a great panel with us today. Angie Alberto Escobar from HEAT, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to drive systems change through ethical and efficient thermal energy transition. She is the Director of Community Gas to Geo at HEAT. She's going to provide some great information about geothermal generally, but also the work that HEAT is doing to transition our energy system to geothermal. Then we will be hearing from folks from Lowell, University of Massachusetts Lowell, and the City of Lowell. We have Rory O'Mahony, who's with us. He's the Executive Director from the RIST Institute for Sustainability and Energy at UMass Lowell, and Catherine Moses, the Sustainability Director from the City of Lowell, to tell us about their networked geothermal pilot project that they are working on with National Grid, which is incredibly exciting. Complicated project that I'm very excited to hear more about. And then finally, we're going to get more local with Sue Goganian, the Director of Historic Beverly, who will walk us through her lessons from an air source heat pump installation in their historic Cabot House building. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Angie Alberto Escobar to kick us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be speaking with all of you about how we can efficiently and ethically transition our thermal systems beyond gas. I'm a director at HEAT, as Neil mentioned, which is a climate solutions nonprofit. Something that I like to mention is that we never take funding from industry, gas or geo, in order to maintain trust across all our stakeholders. We search for data-driven solutions and make those answers open to all. So we're here today to talk about how we're upgrading our building energy systems so that they are more resilient, reliable, and efficient. But most importantly, how can we do this at the speed and scale that we need to meet our emissions reductions targets? To reduce emissions from the building sector, we have to meet the heating needs in our buildings with electricity instead of combustible fossil fuels. Over time, the electricity generated and consumed should come from energy sources that involve no combustion, such as renewables. The more efficiently we electrify our buildings, the less renewables we need. This includes making our building envelopes more energy efficient. Heat pumps, such as these air source heat pumps on the left there, are 2 to 3 times more efficient than a gas boiler. They use the same technology as your fridge to move heat rather than create heat, or move thermal energy rather than create thermal energy. So HEAT's taken a hard look at our current energy systems, both gas and electric. So what will happen to our grid as we electrify? This is a graph of our current electric peaks. Currently, demand on our electric grid peaks in the summer when AC units get switched on. One thing to note is that our grid is sized to meet this peak demand. Now, how will our electric demand change as we electrify heating now? Well, the answer is it depends on the technology. This study shows the impact on the grid if overnight we chose a technology and electrified our heating demand. This exercise showed us that the coefficient of performance of whichever the dominant strategy that we choose is will impact the size of the electric grid and the investments that we'll have to make to size that electric grid appropriately to meet the demand. In a study published last December by Oak Ridge National Lab, they compared mass deployment of air source heat pumps against ground source heat pumps. And the results were consistent with the last study. A higher electric demand will not only be extremely hard to meet with just renewables, but also incredibly costly. If we decarbonize our built environment with a more energy efficient technology, in this case, ground source heat pumps, we can expect to invest almost 25,000 less miles of transmission lines, which will cut our cost to decarbonize the grid by 1/3, which is a mega number. It's huge. So I say all this to say that efficiency matters. That was our examination of the electric system, and now I'll turn your attention to our current gas system. This is a snapshot of our leaky, aging gas pipes. The red dots you see is all the infrastructure work required over a 5-year period. This is to maintain safety and reliability of the system, which is absolutely critical. But the pipes being installed now will be paid for by gas customers for over half a century. This means for decades after we stop using the pipes because of our state's emissions mandates and for the greater good, our children will still need to pay for them. This is the utility stranded asset issue. Heat pumps are becoming increasingly popular, partly because they offer heating and cooling. They're now outselling gas furnaces across the country. As homeowners with disposable income transition to heat pumps individually, that leaves fewer gas customers, but that gas system hasn't gotten any less expensive. So each customer leaving the gas system increases the cost for the remaining customers. At some point, heating with gas will be more expensive than heating with air source heat pumps. And after that, customers will flee fast. And in the end, the only ones left on the gas system are those who can't afford a new heating system. And that is not a just transition. So since we want renewable energy to be accessible to everyone, 5 years ago, HEAT invented network geothermal. It's a street segment network of ground source heat pumps. Like the gas system, the infrastructure is in the street with service lines going to each building. The service lines are not showed here, but this is the horizontal infrastructure in the street with service lines to each building. So the shared water loop interconnects with vertical loops that are placed in boreholes going just a few hundred feet down. The heat pumps are in each building. The loop is filled with just plain water, making them safer for customers and for workers. And all the components are readily American made. And it's a closed system, thus there's no risk of contamination. Gas utilities have the customers, the right of way in the street, the expertise in pumping thermal energy through pipes underground, and they have the financing mechanisms to spread the cost of this infrastructure across all utility customers and over decades. So it's not too much for any one of us, and it's accessible to all. It doesn't matter who down that street can afford an air source heat pump or not, everybody would get renewable energy, renewable thermal. So this is a non-intermittent renewable that would provide stable energy bills because it's locally produced and available all the time. It's also resilient to weather catastrophes because the infrastructure is underground. So HEAT proposed a merged gas geo rate base where we could decarbonize not one building at a time, but whole neighborhoods at a time. Now, the term geothermal or geo can be somewhat confusing because it describes a number of different technologies. I like to think of it as a last name in a family with lots of different individuals that are all unique and different. So we're not talking about super deep hot rock geothermal power plants or still pretty deep hot water geo districts. What we're talking about is closer to a geo building where you have a ground source heat pump and some sort of loop in the ground. It can be vertical, it can be horizontal. But instead, network geothermal uses all of the existing components of a geo building, the loop, the heat pumps, but configures them in a new way to maximize efficiency. Networked heat pumps have advantages. Imagine an office building with the heat from its computers humming all the way through the winter. It's going to be rejecting heat into that shared loop of water. The horizontal loop making the water hotter. And then that heat can be used in homes down the street. The thermal energy, the thermal waste, is being harnessed by the main loop, which increases energy efficiency. That's energy that we don't have to create. The vertical components of the system, the boreholes, are anywhere from 200 to 1,000 feet in the bedrock. In the summer, when the homes on the shared loop are all in cooling mode, they will reject heat into the loop. And that heat will move into the bore field. The thermal energy or heat will move outwards into the bedrock and be stored there. This heat can then be extracted by the same method, but in reverse, during the heating season. So this thermal storage, seasonal thermal storage, has increased efficiency as well. So a quick review of the benefits of these systems, some that I mentioned. A geothermal network can help meet the speed and scale that we need to meet the critical emissions reductions targets while minimizing the impact on the grid and therefore the cost to build out that grid. It gives us a plug-and-play solution to avoid investing in more gas pipe. Since the pipes contain only water, it is safer than natural gas. This will also reduce the risk associated with single-point failures of the gas system, which can leave people vulnerable or even potentially lead to disasters like the Merrimack Valley gas disaster in 2018. The cost of the fuel for gas systems is about 50% of your heating bill currently. Removing fuel costs will decrease dependence on fossil fuels and the global fossil fuel markets, which can be quite volatile, providing more predictable and affordable energy bills. Because there is zero combustion associated with network geothermal, the air pollution in our homes from our gas furnaces will decrease, providing healthier indoor air. The system provides cooling, an added benefit and a crucial one, seeing as heat waves are increasing in frequency and can increase the risk of mortality for vulnerable populations, such as the elderly, children, and individuals with pre-existing health conditions. Additionally, since the infrastructure is underground, as I mentioned before, it's resilient against flooding and other climate catastrophes. Because of the multi-solving approach that HEAT has taken while engaging with many diverse stakeholders, the solution has garnered the attention of gas utilities across the country. The gas utilities on the screen represent 50% of gas customers in the United States, and they are convening in a coalition called the UNGC to explore the concept, to share learnings, and build internal buy-in within the gas utilities for this business model evolution. A critical component of that consideration is keeping gas workers in their jobs. Everyone deserves safety, and the gas HDP pipes installed today are exactly the same as the water pipes needed for geothermal, allowing the existing gas workforce to transition and giving us a good place to start off from. Here's a snapshot of the gas to geo transition in the Commonwealth. There are 4 installation projects, one of which you'll hear about today. 3 are in the planning phase, 1 is operational, and 12 communities are building stakeholder buy-in locally and conducting technical feasibility studies. One of them in your very own backyard, St. Peter's Episcopal Church. You have great champions in Achieve Renewables and Reverend Ives, so if you're interested in being part of a GEO network, you can either scan this code or reach out to me directly, and I can put you in contact with those folks championing in Salem. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Rory O'Mahony. I'm the Executive Director of the RIST Institute for Sustainability and Energy at UMass Lowell, and also serve as Senior Advisor for the UMass System and President's Office on Climate, Energy and Sustainability. I will say we're massive fans of HEAT. As you heard from Angie's presentation, they're a fantastic organisation, and we've been very lucky to partner with HEAT over the last number of years on a number of initiatives in addition to the Lowell Network Geothermal Pilot. Just a quick bit about the RIST Institute at UMass Lowell. Everybody asks us what RIST is. They always think it's risk, which is ironic given that we're talking about climate change. But we were very fortunate to have an alum from UMass Lowell, Brian Rist, graduate from our business school in the 70s, and went down to Florida to work in the construction industry. And one of his first projects, I don't think he would have felt fortunate at the time, was destroyed by Hurricane Andrew. So he basically developed a company that's now called StormSmart, which is the largest global company that dissipates the impact of increased climate activity in the construction industry. So when he came back to UMass Lowell and saw the work that we were doing in the energy, climate, sustainability space, we were very fortunate to receive a donation to set up this institute and allow us to advance our efforts. So the RIST Institute comprises what were formerly 3 distinct entities at UMass Lowell. And this is an important piece for how we approach our work in this space. One is the Centre for Energy Innovation. So for over 40 years now, UMass Lowell has a lot of technical expertise in all things energy, everything from wind to hydrogen to different types of combustion. The second leg of the Institute is our climate change initiative, which is primarily policy-based and looks at the political and social implications of climate change issues, opportunities, etc. And then our own, what was formerly Office of Sustainability, a lot of the work that we do in partnership with Catherine and the city and interaction with state and federal agencies. So it's very important for us that we have technical expertise talking to policy experts and then looking at practical implementation standpoints. Because we know in many instances this is not a technical question anymore. It's a whole systems-based approach, and that's how we try to address sustainability, both internally and with a lot of our external partners. We've been quite successful. So since we started 4 years ago, we've got over $90 million in external research and innovation funds directly affiliated with the RIST Institute. And we really want to work across what would traditionally be siloed areas, not just to the university, but external to the university as well. So looking at the partnerships that are intrinsic to driving real practical change in the space is really the defining mission for the RIST Institute at UMass Lowell. And one of our greatest partners, not just because they're so close to us, but based on a very like-minded approach, is the City of Lowell, and Catherine Moses, their Sustainability Director, who's also a UMass Lowell alum, by the way.
Thank you so much for that, Rory. I'm Catherine Moses. I'm the Sustainability Director for the City of Lowell, and we are all about enabling a just and equitable energy transition. There are a number of reasons for that, but I think Lowell is a unique community. We have a large population of minority. So we have a large populations of people for whom English is not their first language. We have a large population of lower and moderate income residents. We have 72% of our census tracts located in an environmental justice community. We tend to have older building stock than your average community. And we know that with these types of characteristics, a lot of times there's the tendency when new and innovative things come along where we could be left behind, where Angie was talking in her presentation about people that are on heat pumps that exit the gas system and those that are left to kind of pick up those pieces. A lot of times those people are those for whom homeownership is not the norm. We have a large percentage of renters in our city. And for these reasons, we really are very interested and committed to making sure that we are thinking proactively about those in our community, that we're trying to engage people in a manner where we can meet them where they are, and that we can help to demystify a lot of the very significant changes that are going to be required as we transition away from fossil fuels and get on the pathway to net zero by 2050. I know it was so exciting to hear from the climate chief this morning, but it was also so a little overwhelming to think about all of the different changes and all of the investments that are needed. And so we in the City of Lowell are starting to approach this by pursuing funding. We pursue federal funding sources, state funding sources. We have utility partners. We've leveraged $23 million in grants and additional funds from our partners over the past 3 years. We're looking to implement all of the above strategies to address emissions reductions, climate resilience, and environmental justice. And none of those things can be done in any kind of silos, because as we've seen through the various speakers this morning, they're all interconnected. The way that we use and produce energy is related to how much of the changes we'll see in our environment. But even if we make very radical changes to meet our 2050 goals, we know we're still going to have to start planning for the changes that are inevitable and the resilience piece of it. And of course, we want to make sure that the most vulnerable amongst us are not left behind. And so the approach that we've taken to reach all of these solutions are to forge those internal and external partnerships to amplify the work that we do in the city. Obviously, I'm a little biased about our partner in UMass Lowell being an alum of their solar engineering program, but we also have partnered with our housing authority. We've partnered with community-based organizations. We've been partnering within the city amongst the different departments. We partner with our Lowell Public Schools, and we're always looking to grow our partnerships. So if you think you would like to partner with the City of Lowell, come see me afterwards. But we were very fortunate when National Grid began the idea of piloting a network geothermal system to have a strong partner like UMass Lowell to really put together a project that is in the early stages of piloting. So I'm going to flip back to Rory and let him tell you a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Catherine. One way, I was debating whether I should say this or not, but one way you could potentially partner with us, I'm hiring for a director of sustainability right now, so if there's anyone out there that's interested, come chat with me after. So this slide here, this may be a bit hard to see, but just to give you an idea of how we approach this type of work. What you see here, the blue shaded areas, small, they're UMass Lowell buildings, and then the red connecting dots are our primary transportation network across Lowell. They're overlaid on an environmental justice map. So this really makes it very clear to us the necessity of this type of partnership-based approach. Like any college, university, we have our own climate commitments and our carbon reduction goals. We're well on track to meeting them. But at the end of the day, what does it matter if the community that we're a part of are dealing with the worst impacts of climate change and increasing cooling degree days? Catherine had mentioned a lot of the environmental justice issues that are present in some of the communities in Lowell. So we have a responsibility to work hand in hand with the community that we're lucky to be a part of to develop these shared and equitable solutions. So this is really important for us as we consider the type of projects that we try to deliver, not just for the campus, but for the community. And Lowell, again, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the term of a gateway city, but Lowell is a great example of this next transition of how gateway cities can address the climate transition in a fair, just and equitable manner. And what we want to do is develop these scalable and replicable solutions. So as Angie mentioned, this is a pilot. Our hope coming out of this pilot is that we have a playbook that our communities can follow and that we can rapidly accelerate this transition because there's just so much at stake here. So a bit more on the specifics of the project. As Catherine mentioned and Angie mentioned, there was a rate case that was filed to enable these pilots. So like everybody in the room, we follow activity at the State House and at the federal level very closely. So when we were aware that there was a pilot potential in National Grid territory, I'm not ashamed to say we lobbied hard to get it in Lowell. It's something that was very, very important for us. So I think, Catherine, maybe 3 years before we ever got into specifics on this project, we were working with National Grid and our various legislative partners to make sure that they would realize that Lowell is a great location for this. We were fortunate enough to submit an application in partnership with Catherine and her team at the city and luckily selected as the site for the National Grid pilot. So what you see here is the actual project area, and the way we structure this through countless meetings with engineering teams and National Grid and Heat is that we would effectively utilize the university's property as the well field for this system. And we felt it was the most efficient way to do it. Now, having said that, and I don't mean this in a bad way because DCAM are great partners for us, a lot of these partners, or a lot of these parcels were in different DCAM ownership areas. So we had to do a lot of wrangling and back and forth with DCAM to get the permitting and legislative actions approved to allow us to utilize UMass property to do this type of work. But basically, the yellow area here is UMass Lowell surface parking lot. This building here is the administrative home of the RIST Institute. And this area here, and just down to the left where the Lowell Housing Authority is, they've got a multifamily unit here. That's effectively the extent of the network geothermal project. So Angie had mentioned the ability to decarbonize communities in one go, and that's what we're trying to do. One of the reasons we were so keen on getting this project is that it's built off multi-year research projects that UMass Lowell has led in partnership with the community. So again, there's certain areas here. This is a neighborhood called the Acre in Lowell. Traditionally being a community of immigrants, starting off the Irish, French Canadian, now home to a lot of very heavy Southeast Asian population. And we've been working again in partnership with the city and numerous partners to better understand. I'll give you a good example here. Mass save uptake rates in this neighborhood are below 20%. And the residents are paying into that at the same rate that communities that are availing of it at 80, 90%. So that's obvious why we need to move the needle here. But until we start to do research and independent research, we have a number of projects that was funded by the NSF, by the Department of Energy, with these communities, we didn't know what those issues were. We thought we had an idea, but until we went in and worked hand in hand with the community, we had no idea of the importance of religious elders in the Cambodian community and how they collectively make decisions. So a very rich learning environment, and we were able to go to National Grid and our state and various partners and put this forward as a resource that we could use to deliver on the project from again, not just a technical question here, but how do we do it in a way that's fair, equitable and just. So the project planning stages have been going on for about 18 months now. I will say it hasn't been without issues, right? So the design process, was pretty straightforward. Some issues obviously with some various, back and forth with state agencies, and anytime you work with the UMass system, there's numerous kind of ownership models involved. But one of the big issues that we ran into is the cost. Not the technology itself, we just hit it at the wrong time, coming out of the pandemic. And a lot of construction costs were inflated. So when the costs came back for this, there's been a lot of additional work trying to figure out a way that we can move forward into construction phase in a way that leverages some of the additional pilots that are going on and trying to achieve these economies of scale. I will say what this, and again, as it is a pilot, it's been incredibly rich for us from a research and innovation standpoint. So we're fortunate to be working with HEAT in pursuing one of the National Science Foundation engines grants to really start to stand up the network geothermal workforce and look at the type of training opportunities that are essential to allow us to deliver this type of project at scale. You saw some of the stats that Angie had put up there. And I mean, she's not exaggerating when she says our ability to save here, you're talking the trillions of dollars. But to be able to deliver this infrastructure at scale, we're basically standing up a whole new industry. And that's something that we're committed to helping HEAT move forward and making sure that Massachusetts is at the epicenter of this. But to get back to Catherine's point before I turn it back to her, none of this is possible without the type of partnership between the city, between the university, between HEAT, that would underpin a project like this. So again, you're getting into different ownership issues, different technical questions, how we can support Catherine and her team, making sure that City of Lowell residents are not getting burned during the energy transition, and we're all working in lockstep to deliver on a shared project together. So it's easy to say that up here, but it requires a lot of work and a lot of partnership and coordination that has underpinned everything here outside of the straight up engineering and technical components of the project.
And so where are we now? So the system is at 100% design. There are different kinds of research and engagement opportunities that we're looking at. We, with our wonderful partner UMass Lowell and our partners at the Environmental Defense Fund and HEAT and the Geothermal Center for Excellence, we are looking for ways to not only get this pilot going once we figure out with National Grid what the economics of it will look like and how that will impact it, but also thinking beyond the pilot project itself. How can we work with other partners in our community to start to set up the feasibility to look at this for different areas? How can these different network geothermal systems connect to one another? How can we engage students at the university and integrate the students within our secondary education system, elementary and secondary education systems, to really help them to understand the importance of geothermal, the importance of these types of pilot projects, and the importance of really getting community buy-in for these types of things. And we're hoping to really be able to show within this pilot that you can do this in a dense urban environment by bringing together the right players, by bringing together the right funding sources, by leveraging all available dollars, using all available partners, and that you will have a stronger product at the end because of the way that you took your approach. And then I will wrap it up by letting Rory tell you a little bit about the KELD initiative.
Thank you, Catherine. So additional ways that we could potentially partner. Last June, and no prizes for guessing how I ended up on this trade mission, but when Governor Healy went to Ireland, we basically learned a lot over there from some of their university community research initiatives. So we are standing up a new initiative called the Massachusetts Clean Energy and Environment Legacy Transition Project, KELT as an acronym. Basically, we'll be placing up to 40 grad students a year, not just from UMass, but from higher ed institutions across the state with communities to accelerate decarbonisation efforts. And these are going to be highly skilled grad students, who are well skilled in grant writing, consensus building, etc. So we're looking at placements from 6 months to a year. That's fully funded through this initiative. So we'll be going public with this in the next couple of weeks. But if there's any interest out there, this is a great opportunity to partner with us. We're also using this initiative as a way to basically build out the state's network geothermal workforce, as I mentioned, not just through external federal grants, but through some seed funding that we have through this initiative. And then one of our big academic partners here is Boston University, particularly the data sciences team. So providing direct assistance to communities for energy permitting and siting. If you're following the legislature, you know this is a big push as we move to smaller systems like a network geothermal system. We're going to require a lot of consensus building, a lot of technical analysis. So a great opportunity to get involved with us in the next couple of weeks. The model for this CELT initiative too, this guy, I wonder, is he here, Dylan Patel? Some of you guys might know him, he's a Green Communities Coordinator. But he's a grad student who worked with us at UMass Lowell and basically carved out the model for how we can do this through the Lowell Network Geothermal Project. So we'll be around after. We'd love to chat with anybody about ways that we can support each other's work moving forward. And I know everyone says that, but we've got to partner on this stuff to make sure we can deliver it at the scale and pace that's necessary. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sue Gogani. I'm the Director of Historic Beverly, which is the historical society for the city of Beverly, Massachusetts, right next door across the bridge from here. We own 3 historic structures, 2 17th century buildings, and the building I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to begin by saying that as the director, I was in charge of administration, financing, and I was part of the team that oversaw all aspects of the schedule and the impact on the building, both from a preservation point of view and an operations point of view. I am not the technical person. If you have technical questions about the project, I will not be able to answer them. But I'm happy to connect you with someone who can, and I'm also happy to give you a tour if anyone would like to come over to the Cabot House. So this is the John Cabot House, built in 1781. It has an addition on the back that was built in the late 19th century that is not part of the project. It was originally the home of John Cabot, the privateer owner. It's been the headquarters for Historic Beverly since 1892, and it's also a regional visitor center. It serves as a space for collections, research, programs, and a museum shop. It's open year-round, but inadequate heat. There was no heat on the 3rd floor, and no central air conditioning means it was a very uncomfortable place most of the time. Because of that, our programming was limited. We didn't do programs for almost half the year, and we also, frankly, did less at a staff level because in the summertime it was extremely uncomfortable. We used space heaters and portable AC units, but they didn't help much. So this is one of the main reasons for the project. This chart shows the change in temperature and relative humidity in our main storage space at the Cabot House. The other rooms have similar readings. Our collection is close to 750,000 items. We do have several thousand objects, but it's largely an archival collection, which means that this type of situation is really detrimental to the collection. We couldn't afford to have complete climate control in all of our storage spaces, so we had a plan to reconfigure all of our collections to try and put the most vulnerable items in one large space. So this was originally part of a much larger project that involved an addition, the removal of the existing building in the back and the building of a new addition. During COVID, we broke out this part of the project because of the ventilation issue. So we repriced the project in 2021, raised the funds, and then went out for final pricing in the spring of 2022. The pricing had gone up more than 20%. in about 6 months. So we stepped back and we raised more money. Then we repriced it again in the fall of 2022. And it had gone up again, but it was clear that the pricing was not going to change for the better in the near future, so we decided to go ahead anyway. We didn't consider the rebates from National Grid at the time because we did not want to rely upon them. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts holds a restriction on the exterior of the Cabot House, and CPA funding required approval from the Historic District Commission. So I work in Beverly and I live in Boston. Both communities have CPA funding. If you live in a Massachusetts community that doesn't have a CPA, do whatever you have to do to get it. It is absolutely worth all the trouble and all the work that the campaign takes because it is transformational in terms of funding for historic preservation. And this kind of project qualifies for historic buildings and historic organizations because it protects historic fabric. So the goal was, from a preservation point of view, not to make any new openings into the building from the exterior, but to find a way to use those that already existed. And I will say that, unfortunately, there have been quite a number of intrusions into the building already. There were no legal restrictions on the interior, but we wanted to minimize damage to the historic fabric and to our collections. That required some very creative thinking. We didn't have a project manager. We're a really small staff. We had a trustee with the expertise to oversee the project, and our associate director for collections devoted about 75% of her time over 10 months to this. I probably gave about 15% of my time. It's really hard to do this without a project manager, really hard. We would not do it again this way. Somehow we would figure it out. Even contractors who care about historic properties and who understand your concerns, and ours did, need constant oversight. It's a historic building. We had no idea what we would find when we started pushing piping through the floors and the walls. And the issues could have been both obstacles to the project as designed, and also that we would encounter problems that we didn't know about before, but now that we knew about them, we would have to fix them. So that happens. We knew that we couldn't create ideal conditions in the building, but we could make a significant improvement, which would benefit our collection, primarily, as I said, made up of materials that are vulnerable to swings in temperature and humidity. It was 2020. Ventilation was a thing. In addition to not having an HVAC system, most of our windows had been painted shut or were damaged. We reopened to the public the very first week that Governor Baker said that we could, but we severely restricted the number of people in the building because we really couldn't provide adequate ventilation. And once the winter came and we couldn't open windows, we closed completely those first 2 winters. We needed to protect our historic fabric as we installed the systems, avoiding damaging the materials, and integrating the new system was really time consuming, and it required a lot of patience on everybody's part. We knew utility costs would increase for us, and we couldn't do anything about the lack of insulation in the walls. Those of you with historic structures know that, there's limited ways you can insulate buildings like that. But we did put in a brand new floor and insulation in the attic, which we are hoping, particularly in the winter, will make a big difference. No one wanted to be in our building in the summer or in the winter, including us. We had inadequate heat. We had portable AC units, but they weren't that helpful. So several months of the year, the environment wasn't conducive to on-site programs or research, which is also a big part of what we do. We were missing opportunities to attract visitors, and we were also missing opportunities to raise funds. We were worried, and still are, about the increase in utility costs with this change. Heating and cooling costs for our 3 properties are a significant part of our budget. But we knew we needed to improve the capacity and efficiency of our systems, and our mission says that we need to protect our collections. We have only been fully operational since April, so the cost changes are not known to us at this time, but we'll know a lot more in about 8 months. We had raised $500,000 from private funders for that original larger project. We ended up using almost all of it for this because of the significant price increases. That was with the permission of the donors. We received $200,000 from the Mass Cultural Facilities Fund, and we received $175,000 from Beverly's Community Preservation Act funds. So that's a really big contribution to a project of this size, which is about 1.2 million total. We didn't count on, but ultimately received more than $100,000 in National Grid rebates. We paid only insurance and utilities for our temporary storage space, so that was a huge savings for us. The rebate process was tricky. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We had to move almost everything in our building, and much of it had to move off-site. For those of you with collections, we had an arrangement to rent locally that included an agreement not to reveal that we were tenants, so that there would not be a risk to our collections. Larger objects were grouped in the center of the rooms to start and shifted when necessary. Everything was protected with multiple layers. And even though we're a historical society, we love to throw things away. We filled 4 dumpsters with stuff that should have gone years ago, including broken exhibit components, and we recycled many outdated electronics. That's Jonathan. Jonathan was all of us that day. We had the most incredible staff and volunteers, and it was really hard work, and he really did feel like that day. We have a big blow up of that in our building. So that's our largest storage space. That's before and ready for installation of the system. The floor protection had to be done in stages because those are the larger items that we're not going to be moving out of the room. This is the room that received humidity control, so all surfaces were sealed with special paint. The door frame was altered to create a tight seal. We also added interior storms and blackout shades in this room. But the totality of the changes in this room mean that we are finally caring for our collection properly, and that cannot be measured in dollars. We had to remove both asbestos and many old radiators and pipes. On the left is the stairway to our basement space, which originally held our transportation collection, which was largely archival. That area now holds ceramics and glass and the papers. We moved up to the 3rd floor. The abatement crew was not only terrific, they videoed the process for us because we were not allowed into the space, so great for social media. You have to let people know what you're doing. We love these window images. The signs not only directed people to our temporary headquarters at Hale Farm, they also attracted attention to the project and resulted in some additional funding. And that's, if any of you know Cara Hutchins from Communications Inc., she worked with us on all of that. Our major efficiency action was installing insulation and a new floor in the attic, which you see there on the left. We also had window women, they're terrific, repair all the windows and make them operable. Most have been painted shut over the years. The remarkable impact of the cross ventilation in the summer of 2023, during the summer, did make me question why we were putting air conditioning in the first place. It was the most comfortable the building had ever been because we essentially had all the windows open all summer long. So the one item we custom ordered is the electrical panel on the left because supply chain challenges were in effect here. That was going to take us about 3 times as long if we did an off-the-shelf version. However, we did learn that this is much bigger than what we needed. So you should make sure you have someone who can assess this accurately. I decided after the fact that it was like a big toy for some of these people, and they never worked on one this big, and that's why they wanted us to have it. So, on the right, the foundation for the exterior equipment. Unfortunately, there's no way around a major visual impact to the exterior, but it's not in any way attached to the structure. there's something strangely beautiful about the pipe installation, and the attic is one of the few places where you can actually see it still. The two guys from Breen and Sullivan who installed this system, I think were gymnasts in a previous life, because they had to get into these incredibly small spaces. I really don't know how they did it, and it was just remarkable. The biggest challenge that we faced was that the planned HVAC design wouldn't work. The engineers used the extremes of the specs, like maximum pipe runs, and assumed everything would be fine. When the installers saw it, they asked for a meeting with us, and they said that they thought it was unlikely that it would work as planned. They also said this happens to them a lot. Always listen to the people who are doing the actual work. We did work with them to come up with a solution, but it took quite a lot of time. We were also adamant that we did not want water introduced into the historic Cabot House for the humidity control. We must have said that a dozen times. That was ignored, and the proposed solution brought water pipes into the Cabot House. After much wasted time, we pulled that part of the project out of the scope and we figured it out ourselves. And again, it appeared after the fact that they didn't want to have to argue with us because they didn't agree with us. So instead of having the conversation and having it out and coming out to some kind of conclusion, they just went ahead and designed something that contradicted one of the most important aspects of what we were saying. Whenever possible, that looks like it got turned around, but that's okay. Whenever possible, we installed the units where the radiators had been placed. The flooring underneath was already damaged. Actually, these new units are less noticeable than the radiators, and they're easier to keep clean. That is the ceiling over there. I didn't see that, I'm so sorry. There were a few rooms where there wasn't adequate floor space to replace an existing radiator, so we did use ceiling units. The units in the historic rooms were fed from either above or below, so we needed to box in the piping. We were thrilled with the quality of the new trim, which complements the historic material, but it is clearly distinct. You may not be able to see it, but it's wonderful. We spent a lot of time on this, and we're very lucky to have a superbly talented carpenter who did it for us. There you see the exterior units. The least attractive part of the project. We did install fencing to hide this from the street. One major holdup was our reliance on National Grid to upgrade the service. They were not at all responsive, and when they were, they actually contradicted each other, particularly about who was supposed to go first, the contractor or National Grid. I finally contacted a community relations person. We did get a response after a month. My contractor told me that he had projects that he waited far longer than a month to get a response from National Grid. Our biggest setbacks came because both compressors failed almost immediately. The first one just as the system was coming online, and the second one about 2 months later in the middle of winter. I learned from the installer that when the systems are assembled in the factory, they don't include a filter because it's a closed loop, but the installers now add a filter every time a compressor fails, which is what they did for us, and they've both worked beautifully ever since. This is, for those of you that are interested, our humidity control solution. This is a unit from Canada. This system provides humidity control for our largest storage space on the 3rd floor. Remember, I said we didn't want any water pipes. This is in the basement, and it feeds up to the 3rd floor. It's designed specifically to provide safe and effective humidity control from up to 50 meters away. It is supposed to maintain, we'll see if it does, constant relative humidity levels, even if the ambient temperature in the space fluctuates. So we've only had that in since April. Once we've had a year in, we'll have a better idea of how well it's working. This is the control panel in the basement. All the rooms do have individual controls, but they've all been disabled, so that the only way that anything can be changed is from the basement and by us. Most of the time, the system operates beautifully. We have had to touch it maybe 2 or 3 times. When we have a very large group of people in the building, we then need to tweak it a little, but it's really been great. And you probably remember that this July was about the hottest month we've ever had. We would absolutely have had to close under our previous circumstances. And I have gone around several times to people saying, "You're taking this for granted." We're already taking all this for granted, that we're so lucky that we've had this really comfortable summer. So the rebate, this was a lot of work to apply because I couldn't apply, the contractor had to apply. So it took a lot of nudging and reminders, but it was worth it. We did need to correct several things in the original application, but the support staff from National Grid was actually really great. And once the application was accepted, we had the money, I think, within 30 days. So it was definitely worth it to us. And what it allowed us to do was to do some of the kind of aesthetic improvements that we needed to do because of the work that we had just done. So, oh, and I also should say that the guidelines change on those. So if you're going to go for a rebate, you should just, check when you're doing the project to make sure that it's what you need. So in conclusion, I just want to mention that everyone we worked with was great, but in particular, Breen and Sullivan, as I mentioned before, and Deulis Brothers were just remarkable. They put up with a lot from us. They seemed to really care about the place. And I'll end where I began. I can't answer any technical questions, but I can connect you with people who can, and I would love to give anybody who's interested a tour of it. Thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for those great presentations and for your honesty on the complications and some of the obstacles that you met during those. I think, given the time, I may open it up to audience questions first. I think there may be a lot of audience questions because there was a lot of content to go through, and I think I want to open it up to the audience first.
Thank you all. I've got some questions regarding the network geothermal, which I am absolutely fascinated by. If we take the project example at UMass Lowell, the one that's bounded by Wilder, Walker, Waif, and Broadway streets, I'm curious logistically, how disruptive would that be to local traffic patterns, to install the new piping? What kind of construction timeline are you thinking about? I know it's only been in development for 18 months and the economics aren't all there. I'm also curious, and heat would probably be better for this, if you were going to do a sister project and expand that onto the neighboring block, is it an expansion of that loop, or do you create secondary loops that then exist independently? Do they tie together? Sorry, I'm just really intrigued by how this can scale up in the long term.
Yeah, awesome. I can start and then I'll pass to Rory. Yeah, so it depends on the execution partner, and that sounds kind of strange, execution partner, but it depends on who is installing. So there are some firms that are getting up to speed very quickly by so usually there's a general contractor that looks over the entire project, and that includes a ton of different trades, right? And so if you're talking about just trenching, the trenching depends on a number of things. Who's working on the project? Is it union labor, folks that have been doing trenching very efficiently for many, many years? Or is it a new firm because they're cheaper? That will impact the speed of the project, is experience. The second question was around an expansion loop, right? So currently we are looking into heat applied to a Department of Energy grant for the design of an expansion loop. And there's actually 3 different considerations. to use a part of the existing loop in Framingham and have a shared middle section and just kind of expand along that, or to have two parallel loops that are talking to each other, connected to each other, but still separate so that they could island from each other. And ultimately, and there was a third that I can't remember, but ultimately having the wider, larger shared loop in the middle with two kind of butterfly loops on the side was the more technically, that was just the option that made the most sense technically. So in terms of project disruption, I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of subsurface work there, so it's obviously going to be disruptive. For the UMass parking lot, we have a schedule worked out with the contractor on National Grid that minimizes that disruption. So trying to do a lot of the work during the summer when the students are not and faculty are not in session. The Lowell project itself is actually designed with I guess like a mini expander on it. So there's 4 boreholes in the right of way. It's not on Wilder, I can't remember the name of the street. Wall Street, to basically extend the reach of the loop into another, I think, 3 or 4 customers. So it's definitely feasible. I mean, don't quote me on this, no, but in a simple way, it's kind of like Lego blocks, right? You're stacking on top where you can increase the efficiencies there. You know, the permitting is as Angie kind of alluded to, it's somewhat similar to a gas project, right? It's center line disruption and then the off-takers in each property. So there is a fair amount of permitting there. But anytime you're getting into street work, it's disruptive, but no more so than a regular gas project.
One additional comment that I want to make on expansion. Expanding the loop actually has more benefit to, so having an extension loop actually can benefit the entire system as a whole because you have more sharing, that you're capable of more thermal sharing. The important aspect about sizing a loop, or whenever you're looking at a community and you're thinking, oh, this could be a good first phase and that would be a good second phase, the size of the first loop is critical. So having too small could make it, you know, not the most economically feasible project. So having the right size and the right thermal sources will be super important. And then the planned second loop could target other strategies such as, this housing authority, for example, has electric baseboard heat. That capacity that they already have can be a really kind of synergistic way to increase without increasing electric capacity.
Just one quick last point. When we were doing the pilot test boring, the first time we did it, we had a massive hydro fault line 300 feet down that was kicking out 200 gallons a minute. So obviously we didn't expect that, and we weren't permitted, we didn't have a discharge permit. So, but this is why we're doing pilot projects, right? We want to learn what the roadblocks, potential synergies are there. We were able to readjust the pilot and readjust the outline of the system to avoid that when we get into construction. But I mean, there's no question. I mean, it is disruptive.
Hi, thank you so much. Really fascinating to hear everybody's story. Laura, I'm a resident of Salem. Angie, kind of as you said, geothermal is great for homeowners with disposable income. I recently had my house quoted and couldn't believe how expensive it was, and there was no way I'm able to move forward with that at this time. So I'm really interested in this idea of networked geothermal. I'm curious, Neil, if you can speak to if Salem has this on its radar as something for our city. I know we like to be progressive in our sustainable initiatives. And then further, Framingham and Lowell are both inland cities. We are a coastal city. I know our water table is higher. I'm particularly in a floodplain in Salem. And does that impact the opportunity for networked geothermal with water being a little bit more in the equation?
Great question. So Angie had mentioned the St. Peter's, San Pedro Church as part of their Kickstarter, HEAT's Kickstarter program. They applied for a feasibility study for geothermal. I think Reverend Ives is here still, hopefully, Nathan Ives. That project originally started where Reverend Ives was interested in geothermal for his building, for their building specifically, but then it blossomed into the idea of having network geothermal and having as much geothermal available for as many in the downtown area as possible. We've definitely were talking to Reverend Ives about that project and when he was applying with heat about it, and we're part of that, although they are the grantee, but certainly that's something that we're thinking about. Old Town Hall, we did a feasibility on geothermal for that building specifically. It is definitely appealing to us in terms of our city buildings that are downtown, because there are a lot of restrictions in terms of what we can do in terms of electrifying, like City Hall and Old Town Hall. The roofs are challenging. Putting equipment on those roofs is challenging. So a networked project here is certainly something we're thinking about. I would say it's very early, but the new high school project, which is very, very early in the making, but that we're certainly thinking about geothermal as a possibility. And then I am certainly going to be advocating for possibility of network geothermal in that area. I think I would defer to Angie. I don't know if you know about the water table question and what those implications are. I don't have a good answer to that one.
Yeah, I also want to just shout out Reverend Ives. He's amazing. He's a local champion. I think it was really important for him to be an anchor tenant for a geothermal network, not just because he would benefit or his building would benefit from the energy efficiency, but he really wanted to create or wants to create a resilience hub, especially because that is a hub for the Latino community here in Salem. So, there are a couple of different housing authorities. His mind was set on, the low-income housing authority that has a lot of Hispanic folks in there. And so I think his vision is amazing. I'm Latina, so I'm biased, but it really speaks to me. And just the fact that you can explore a concept and de-risk it for the rest of the community, I think is really important. And so it is kind of like Lego blocks, but we're not just networking buildings together, we're also networking people. And people can be pretty risk averse, right? Especially when it means forking out money for improvements to their home or anything like that. And so to see the church leading, the city participating, I think that would ease a lot of people's minds if it comes to your neighborhood per se. So that your neighbors could also be involved, because it wouldn't just be one person, right? It has to be kind of the whole neighborhood or the whole community that really wants to buy in for the project to be feasible. In terms of the water table, water is actually a great way to capture thermal energy. And so the water question is a little bit complicated, because during drilling operations, water can present a challenge in terms of water management and maintaining a safe and clean site. So for that reason, a lot of the times those cracks are plugged with grout. But if they weren't, a lot more thermal energy could be flowing and could be harnessed from that flowing water. And so that's something that we're still exploring and learning about through the pilots. HEAT actually has a research study where we're putting DFOS, distributed fiber optic sensors, basically temperature sensors, down the cables to understand how temperature is moving throughout the borehole and throughout the bore field, including in Lowell, where there is actually a pretty high water table there. So that's what I would say about the water. It's not infeasible. Also, there are these awesome titanium plates that are heat exchangers that go in the ocean that can tolerate high salinity in China. So there are a ton of innovative solutions out there for harnessing temperature from bodies of water. And Something that is interesting is more of kind of a research question is, can we get our bodies of water, can we pull thermal energy out to get them to their pre-climate change temperatures? So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not the hydrogeologist on our staff, but it is super fascinating. So I wouldn't say that it rules it out at all.
Do you see network geothermal as a primary source for heating homes in various environments, like northern climates and in probably more dense areas? Or is this, kind of more unique type situations where it would be a solution?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I didn't get it too deep into the specific design that he promotes to the more technical partners that we work with at National Grid, at Eversource, and other places, with all the feasibility study partners as well. But an ambient temperature loop, so a single loop, there's district energy systems with 4-pipe, 2-pipe configurations, but the configuration that he likes to advocate for is a single pipe ambient temperature loop. You saw a little bit of why is that those thermal efficiencies can be harnessed with a single loop because you're capturing cold and hot all in one place. But that design is actually more suitable for milder temperatures or milder climates. What is a milder climate? A climate like Boston or Salem, where you have a pretty equal summer and heating load on an annual basis. So in places like Sweden, Denmark, there are 4-pipe and 2-pipe district systems that distribute hot water, and it's economically feasible there because they have so many cold days. But because we're ambient, we're more mild, an ambient temperature system, this specific design is more appropriate, and actually we can get more efficiencies out of that because of that thermal storage. All the heat that we dump in the ground, we can pull out later. And so it's actually really good for urban environments where there's a lot of diverse building loads, so residential, commercial mix, and in close proximity.
Can the geothermal technology be easily retrofitted to existing heating systems in homes? That's one question that I have. I'm also wondering about how the money flows around in this. Is it like an investment that the homeowner makes upfront, or is it like a monthly bill? And I'm also wondering about resiliency to earthquakes.
Sure. Can you repeat your first question one more time? The first
Yes.
one was?
Wondering about
The
the
retrofits.
retrofit, yeah.
Okay, yes, great. That's a great question. So the retrofit for geothermal, so it's a ground source heat pump. So really it's, not to confuse anybody, but it's really a water source heat pump. You're moving water throughout the loop. And you can have kind of like a water to air or water to water, depending on what you have inside the building. Where you have existing ducting, so forced hot air, that can be easily retrofitted. With hot water radiators, those can be as easily retrofitted. Where you run up to a pretty hard challenge and you have to either do mini splits or some other solution is when you have steam radiators, because the temperature is just not getting, the heat pump is not ramping up the temperature up to the speeds, up to the temperatures that you need for steam. So the steam would be a challenge, and you would have to do like a full mini split conversion or something like that. Around paying for the retrofits, I feel like maybe I should pass it on to my fellow panelists to talk about how they're thinking about the Lowell project and retrofits. I'm an advocate for the gas to geo transition, and I really think that, you know, the harm that's been done by, you know, and the profit that's been made from burning fuels should be a part of the equation in terms of getting our buildings up to grade. But that's just my personal opinion.
Have to figure out how to use the microphones first. So because this is a pilot project, I think that's one of the questions the utility is trying to answer as a part of this. And so their initial rate design, you would essentially have an extra charge each month to participate in the network geothermal system. And then they would figure out, based on learnings from the pilot project, how they would essentially scale this if they were to expand it beyond that. I can't remember off the top of my head what the monthly participation is. Is it? Yeah, $50 for the average participant, low income participants, $15 per month. And so that would essentially provide them with access to the loop, to the equipment that they would need. And like I said, I don't know how this will or won't change based on the pricing that came in, but that is the initial proposal for how this will be started to be rolled out as a pilot.
If I could just add from the university's perspective, one of our buildings had steam system. So basically designed to go to mini split. 100% of the cost was covered by mass save program and utility rebates. So there's actually a saving to university because we would have to replace that equipment anyway. So it's not just the geothermal system taking advantage of the efficiency opportunities that are out there first, allows us to design a far more efficient system at the central level. So kind of stacking all of our know-how in a kind of decarbonization approach is really kind of the name of the game for the projects. And that's true in Framingham as well, Angie, right? That we're leading off with efficiency and then designing systems that are smaller to construct and more efficiently operate as well. Your third question about earthquakes, I'm not a geotechnical engineer either, so I don't know, but I'm assuming everything has been designed to scale with the engineering consultants and all the permits that we had to go through for everything here.
Yeah, we're not drilling thousands of feet into the earth, so we're not impacting the subsurface dramatically. And there's also grouting and casing on those in the boreholes to stabilize the boreholes, so that they can, and that's supposed to be done as quickly as possible after they penetrate the subsurface, so that the integrity of the hole can stay pretty stable.
I wanted to first acknowledge I've been to the tour and seen the installation over at Beverly Historical Society, and it is fascinating. Really well done aesthetics. And so I wanted to ask the question just sort of about adapting these types of HVAC systems in historic buildings, especially ones that do have preservation challenges and aesthetic requirements. I'm curious, if you could speak a little bit about how air source and ground source heat pumps both have those challenges. You're kind of touching on that with the steam heat. That seems to be sort of the specific one, but if you have any other kind of points to add about that as well. So,
This is a technical question. From the preservation point of view, I will say, fortunately or unfortunately, there had been an awful lot of intrusions into this building already over 100 and however many years. And that made our job easier because we weren't, for instance, going to the Historic District Commission saying we want to cut these holes in the exterior of the 1781 building. We really didn't. We used everything we already had, but those were already there. The interior spaces on the first floor and the second floor are historic and public space, and so we were very careful with those. The basement is not, and the attic is not, so that's where you can actually see the piping and everything that was done, because we did not have to figure out a way to hide it or mask it or something. It was challenging to get it done, but for us, and I hope for the public, the benefit to the collection by being able to care for it properly, and the benefit to the building as well, exceeds the minor amount, I think, of intrusion that we had to do. So as for the mini splits, in terms of functionality, I think the most important thing I can say is we don't think about it. And that was never the case before. Heating and cooling was a constant comfort issue, a constant public issue. The only time I think about it now is when I realize I've been taking it for granted again, and I go around and say to everybody, they function almost perfectly. So I don't know if there's a technical question somebody else can answer.
We're going to do one more question.
I also have a question for Sue. We were kind of piggybacking in a non-technical way, and maybe giving you a chance to reiterate what you're saying here. We were talking at the lunch around how those of us who've been around long enough remember that some of the biggest enemies towards energy efficiency in building have been historic preservationists. And what you have described is like maybe not a complete 180, but a shift in the historic preservation world. So I'd love to hear your feedback on what have you learned from this that might motivate more of this shifting to reduce the resistance that those of us who've been working in this space on, in energy efficiency, preparing for climate change, climate resilience.
So I don't know if Brad Walker's still here, but I'm actually going to answer this in my capacity as having been a member of the Boston Landmarks Commission for a really long time. We are not resistant. We have not been resistant. The public may be resistant, but one of the things that I think the commission, at least in Boston, has recognized is that if we don't find a way to solve these, we're actually going to lose these places completely. And that's clearly not in the interest of preservation. And for instance, in the Fort Point Channel area near the seaport, which is going to be one of the earliest affected by climate change in Boston, we have worked with people in that historic district to figure out how to deal with the first floor issue, right? The first floors are all going to become completely unusable. How do we solve that? So I think for the most part, members of a lot of historic commissions at least understand that if they truly care about these places, they have to figure this out, because it's the only responsible and the only ethical thing to do to make sure that 100 years from now, we haven't lost all of these really precious places.
That seems like a really important note to end on. Stephen and I are here for this last transition. Such an amazing panel, first though, and really enlightening, both from the historic preservation perspective, but also just this new way of thinking about geothermal and the networking opportunity that may represent, particularly on an environmental justice front, so thank you all so much for that. Stephen, you want to say about what's next?
Yes, so please join us across the street at the Armory for a reception where you can talk amongst all of the panelists that you've heard all day today. And it's, I think we can lead over there. It's pretty easy to find, just right across from the main entrance. And so we hope to see you there.
And there may be like some salads and chicken sandwiches left out. If you see those, you are welcome to take one with you. So don't leave any food behind. Thank you so much.